Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the launch of our report, starting from scratch. We'll just be waiting for a couple of minutes for people to join in. Just a couple of points before we start, and I will repeat these again as people join the webinar, but we have ISL interpretation for this event. Just a second, I think I'm having some internet issues. Okay, am I audible, everyone, on the panel? Okay, sorry, it just got stuck for a second. We will continue to have these technical issues, but I hope they'll be at a minimum. But yeah, we have a sign language interpretation throughout this event. At any point of time, if it's not visible, please do mention it in the chat box and we'll make sure it is visible to everyone throughout the entire event. The event will be conducted in English primarily, but in case there is any, there are small sections where we will be speaking in Hindi. So in case there's any issue with understanding that, again, please do let us know in the chat box and we will make sure to translate it. And finally, throughout the session, if you do have any questions or doubts for the panelists or for the research team, please do put it into the chat box and we'll be sure to address them. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of the panel discussion. But yeah, if there's anything urgent, we can of course address it during the session. So we'll be starting this session today by first talking about our study, starting from scratch, where we'll be discussing the role of parents, teachers, and tech in early childhood education delivery during the pandemic. Before we get to that, though, I'll just take you through the plan for the event today. So we'll go through the findings of the study. We're also joined by Mr. Saurabh Taneja, who is the CEO of the Akanksha Foundation, as well as Siddhant Sachdeva, who is a part of the leadership team of Rocket Learning. They will be talking about the models that we have studied within this report that we are launching. And then we'll move on, of course, to the panel discussion with our esteemed speakers, Ms. Atashi, Ashish Dhawan from CSF, and Dr. Rebecca Winthrop. The panel discussion will be moderated by Dr. Dhani Mehta, who is a co-founder of Vidhi. And we will also be joined by parents and teachers who will be sharing their experiences with EC and with these particular EC models that we have studied during the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so we'll just wait another couple of minutes, if that's okay with everyone, just to let people join in, and then we can start with the actual findings of the study. Okay, so it is 5:35 now. I think maybe we can get started then, if everyone's fine with that. Yeah. Okay. So once again, thank you so much for joining us for the launch of this report. We have conducted this study called Starting from Scratch, where we studied 3 models for EC delivery during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in this study, we basically talk about the role of parents, teachers, and tech in early childhood education delivery during the COVID-19 pandemic. It has been well established in the literature that early childhood education is extremely crucial for the overall development of children, especially in younger years, in early years, but also throughout their lifetime. And it has an impact on their learning and earning capabilities throughout their lifetimes. A crucial aspect of the success of ECE is parental engagement, and especially for this younger age group of children between 3 to 6 years, it is an extremely important aspect because children are unable to learn independently during this age. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, when sites of education shifted from the school to the home, the role of parents as educators has become far more crucial than ever before. However, there are various barriers to parental engagement that prevent caregivers and parents from engaging in their children's education. And this has been true even prior to the pandemic and continues to be true, especially for under-resourced and low-income communities, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of these barriers are, of course, socioeconomic disadvantage itself, but also the use of technology and lack of knowledge on methods to effectively engage and facilitate the learning and development of children. Despite the importance of EC delivery and parental engagement in its success, there's been little evidence created around what actually happened to the delivery of EC during the COVID-19 pandemic. So with this report, what we're really hoping to do is fill in some of that gap by answering the following questions. We first talk about what has been the experience of low-income urban households and under-resourced households during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the experiences of their teachers during this time. We ask the question of who has been able to access EC during COVID-19. We then talk about the structured tech and structured teacher support programs that we have studied in this report to understand whether they have been able to enhance parental engagement in any way. Particularly by actually alleviating some of the barriers that otherwise do prevent parents from engaging in their child's education. And finally, we ask the question of what principles can we learn and adopt from these programs to actually enhance parental engagement and the delivery of EC, even in the long run. So if there's a post-pandemic period or once schools reopen, which is more likely to be the case. So we collected data between April to June 2021, which was essentially at the peak of the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in Maharashtra. Data was, of course, collected telephonically. We spoke to 676 low-income households having 3 to 6-year-olds who were enrolled in 2 types of preschools, Akanksha schools, specifically the preschool grades of Akanksha schools, as well as Balwadis in urban Maharashtra. And we also spoke to 58 teachers with whom we conducted in-depth interviews. These were teachers who were teaching in Akanksha schools and Balwadis as well. So the models that we study under this report, there is, of course, the 2 types of preschools that I've just mentioned, the Balwadis as well as the preschool grades of Akanksha schools. And in response to the COVID-19 school closures, both types of schools were piloting a structured low-tech digital program called the ePathshala program, which was being run by Rocket Learning. So our sample essentially looks as is shown in this chart, where we had a structured tech program being delivered in 2 types of schools, the Balwadis and Akanksha schools. While in Akanksha schools, all parents were participating in the tech program. In Balwadis, there were some parents who were participating and some who were not. So therefore, we have 3 groups in our sample. Group 1 that is enrolled in Balwadis and participating in the structure and not participating in the structured tech program, sorry. Group 2 households that are in Balwadis and participating in the program, and Group 3 that are in Akanksha schools and participating in the tech program. So this becomes important because once we try to understand whether our studied models have actually been able to enhance parental engagement, we compare engagement levels across these 3 groups. So to tell you a little bit about what the programs are actually about, all 3 studied EC programs cater to low-income and under-resourced communities. However, they are distinct from what we might call the status quo of EC delivery, which is the Anganwadi system. One main reason why they are different is because they are dedicated to the delivery of EC compared to, say, Anganwadi workers who deliver, everything from health, nutrition, immunization for this age group, as well as take care of, say, pregnant women's needs and adolescent girls, etc. And EC is only one component in their larger responsibilities. A second important difference to note about our sample is that both Balwadis and Akanksha schools are running in urban contexts where the penetration of both smartphones and internet connectivity is relatively high, even among a disadvantaged group of households. So the ePathshala program is a digital intervention, as I've already mentioned, where they curate and provide structured age-appropriate content for 3 to 8-year-olds. In the case of our study, we are specifically looking at households that were receiving the content for 3 to 6-year-olds. They provide this through bite-sized videos that are shared on WhatsApp groups on which both parents and teachers are added. And the program is designed such that parents are supposed to have most materials easily available at home. Balwadis are dedicated EC centers, as mentioned before. They are run through a public-private partnership model with the MCGM, which is the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai. At present, or at the time of this study, there were 25 different NGOs running Balwadis with the MCGM in Mumbai. Why this is important is because during the pandemic, the kind of educational support or delivery of EC that happened in Balwadis was basically dependent on the initiative of individual NGOs and individual teachers, right? In another way, we have sort of defined this as being relatively unstructured or sporadic in the way that it was delivered, because it was based on the individual initiative of people. Akanksha preschools, on the other hand, while also run in partnership with municipal corporations of both Mumbai and Pune, had certain practices that they conducted even prior to the pandemic, which during the pandemic, they just needed to adapt for digital modes of instruction. And this possibly allowed them to conduct educational and non-educational provisioning in a way that was relatively more structured to the Balwadis that we were able to study. So 2 of these that we would like to point out. The first was Akanksha schools treated parents as partners in delivery of ECE, even prior to the pandemic, through parents' classes as well as adult learning classes, where they essentially supported providing parents with instruction and lessons where they learned how to teach their own children, and they learned what content their children would be learning in classrooms. The second thing that Akanksha schools had prior to the pandemic was a system for providing non-educational support through dedicated personnel of social workers as well as school leaders who were embedded in the community and were able to provide non-educational support such as rations and other forms of support that households might have needed just because they are from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. Okay, so just before we jump into the findings, we've put in this snapshot of what our households look like. The main thing to take away from this is essentially that our households are relatively disadvantaged compared to your average urban Maharashtra household, with a median income, monthly household income of about 12,000 pre-pandemic. Most mothers in our households were primarily doing unpaid work or were domestic workers, and most breadwinners in the household who were the fathers were primarily daily wage laborers. Okay, so jumping into the findings of our study, the first question that we asked was, what has been the status of EC delivery during the pandemic amongst this urban low-income population? We find that with the shift to digital education, class sizes by enrollment fell by up to 30 to 40%. Compared to pre-pandemic class sizes. And if we were to look at the percentage of children who were regularly attending these virtual classes, it had fallen to up to 60%. Teachers attributed this to inaccessibility of devices and internet, as well as parents being unable to invest an appropriate amount of time with their children for their education, as well as a lack of priority for EC within the households compared to other stages of education. For those with access to virtual classrooms, a majority, 86%, were using WhatsApp for the delivery of education. And this was also reported to be the primary and preferred mode of instruction compared to platforms like Google Meet or Zoom, on which teachers would conduct live classes. Teachers also expressed specific concerns over the use of digital modes for ECE. One of them being difficulty of teaching fundamental concepts for such a young age group on a digital mode. They also spoke about many households not having teaching and learning materials at homes, which sometimes made it difficult to have them be engaged in activities. And they spoke about many home environments not being conducive to the learning and development of children. So they cited examples of hostile home environments, for example. Teachers also highlighted that parents lack the knowledge, time, resources, and capacity to teach ECE, and many also struggle with the use of technology. What's important to note here is in this slide, we're essentially talking about teachers' experiences with their entire classroom. So the entire class of children that they would have been teaching had it been a physical school. What we now discuss in the next slides is their specific experiences with the studied ECE models, including the structured tech program. In terms of access, we found that households' ability to invest in education was determining their access to ECE during school closures. 24% of our households reported that they needed to purchase a device in order to continue education during the pandemic. And 38% reported that they needed to buy educational materials to conduct ECE at home. These educational materials could be anything. So, toys, notebooks, any kind of material that would be necessary for a teaching learning activity at home. Importantly, we also saw that there is a digital divide within households as far as younger children or EC is concerned. We know from studies that have happened during the COVID-19 pandemic that children do have to share devices for education within the home. In our sample, on average, every 3 children were sharing 2 smartphones, and 52% of households had fewer smartphones than they had children. Importantly, 45% of our households reported that they prioritized an older child's education over ECE for their younger child. Okay. Now, in this particular slide, we answer the question of whether the structured tech program and the structured teacher support programs that we studied has been able to actually enhance parental engagement for ECE. So we assess whether participation in these studied programs is associated with higher or increased parental and child engagement levels by comparing engagement levels across these 3 groups that we described earlier. So just to quickly reiterate, group 1 are households not participating in the tech program, but who are enrolled in Balwadis. So we categorize them as receiving unstructured tech support and unstructured teacher support, because essentially what they did receive during school closures was based on individual teachers and individual organizations. This is compared to group 2 households also enrolled in Balwadis who were receiving the structured tech program, which is the ePachala program, but were receiving unstructured teacher support. And then finally, we have group 3 households, which are those enrolled in Akanksha schools, who we categorize as receiving both structured tech and teacher support. We find that group 3 households receiving both structured tech and teacher support programs were engaging the most compared to both the other groups. This was followed by group 2 households who were receiving only the structured tech program, and those who were in Balwadis not receiving either structured tech or the structured teacher support programs were engaging the least. If you look at the chart over here, we basically see that group 2 and group 3 households are receiving content and engaging in content on more days in the week prior to data collection. Similarly, if we look at these other indicators, households in group 2 and 3 were more likely to report that they had engaged in all of the activities that they had received in the week prior to data collection. They were also least likely to report that they had engaged in none of the activities, and they were least likely to report that they had engaged for 0 days or 0 hours in the week prior to data collection. So essentially from this, we find across the various indicators of engagement levels that participating in the tech program was associated with higher parent and child engagement levels. These differences also persist after controlling for socioeconomic and demographic differences. So we control for gender and age of the child, we control for maternal education, occupation of the parents, income levels, as well as access to devices. We also control for the specific school that households were attending. And of course, as mentioned earlier, those who were attending both the structured tech and teacher support programs, which is the group 3 households, were showed the highest amount of engagement level, and a higher willingness to continue engaging in the tech program, even if schools did reopen. Teachers also reported similarly that parents were more responsive and were allocating more time towards EC due to this tech program. And they said that the program was able to ease their workload in both curating and creating digital content, which was something that would take up a lot of their time during the pandemic. Some teachers even said that they were able to learn new methods of teaching certain fundamental concepts and skills for ECE through the videos that were shared through this tech program. In this final section, what we try to do is break down and understand how this association might be explained. What we do find through looking at the perceptions of both teachers and parents in engaging with these study DC programs is that these programs, or certain elements of these programs, are able to actually address and alleviate some of the barriers that otherwise were preventing parents from engaging in their child's education. Some of these barriers that we will cover are low self-efficacy of parents in the use of technology, low motivation to engage in ECE, a lack of knowledge and self-efficacy on how to effectively how to effectively teach children so that they are learning well, access to prerequisite materials or educational materials to engage in those activities, and finally, a lack of ability to prioritize ECE within households, especially due to financial and emotional stressors that households might have faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. So some of the pointers that teachers primarily described was the fact that the low-tech and familiar platform of WhatsApp was likely helping parents overcome their hesitancy to engage in tech. They also, however, suggested that appropriate training for both teachers as well as for parents on the use of these technologies and how to use them effectively was what really helped them, helped parents overcome this barrier. So this, the training was something that was provided in the structured teacher support programs, which they felt that over and above the use of a low-tech program was able to facilitate parents' engagement with tech. Similarly, with respect to low motivation to engage in ECE, the tech program appeared to have play-based interactive content, which both parents and their children seemed to enjoy, and it encouraged them to work and engage in ECE. The teachers also cited an incentive system, which is an innovation of this particular tech program, where teachers are sent teachers send weekly report cards as well as smiley faces in response to parents who engage with the content. And this was something that teachers said both in Balwadis and Akanksha schools that really encourage parents and children to continue engaging with the content week on week. Importantly, the lack of knowledge and self-efficacy on methods to facilitate learning is something that both the Akanksha program as well as the ePathshala program were able to address. The innovation of the tech program specifically is that it was using videos that featured an adult doing an activity with a child, which basically showed parents how to appropriately conduct an activity with their child. So while they were both, looking at or watching a video, they were also able to learn the best pedagogy, so to speak, to be able to engage their child effectively. And at the same time, teachers did feel that having frequent parent-teacher interactions where they were able to go through digital content shared, clear the doubts of teachers, and instruct parents on exactly how to engage with their children was further allowing parents and encouraging parents to be able to engage effectively. And finally, the main or one of the primary barriers to engagement, which is socioeconomic disadvantage, was addressed in two ways. The first was the tech program, as we mentioned earlier, was designed to essentially show activities that were contextually appropriate. So largely, teachers did feel like most activities could be conducted with home-based materials, and this minimized any need for expenditure on educational materials among households. And teachers also said that in cases where households didn't have materials, they were able to either provide them or provide alternative suggestions for alternative materials within the household that could be used. And finally, this is an important aspect of what the Akanksha schools were able to do, which was that they were able to provide a structured non-educational support system to households, acknowledging the fact that the stressors that they were facing, both financial and emotional, during the pandemic would likely prevent them from prioritizing EC during this time. So they had routine, what they called well-being calls, where teachers would speak to parents, they would document any urgent needs that parents had, apart from providing moral support. And through their system of dedicated personnel, of social workers who were embedded in the communities, they were able to actually meet the needs of households during this time. These needs also included not just rations and medical care, but also specifically educational materials, including devices and internet recharges. So both directly and indirectly, Akanksha schools, through their structured non-educational support, were able to help parents with engaging. So we do have a final slide just to quickly conclude this. But what we could do now is move on to both Saurabh Taneja as well as Siddhant Sachdeva to quickly take us through their models and to tell us a little bit more about these models. So Saurabh, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you, Nisha. And if we want, we can actually go off the slide share, but I think it's totally fine. Thank you so much, Vidhi team and Rocket Learning team. I think it's been a fulfilling partnership thus far, and I think it's been really enriching for the Akanksha system as well. Let me just quickly give the audience a quick context of Akanksha Foundation. Akanksha Foundation is a 30-year-old nonprofit. We run today 27 schools in public-private partnership model with the city governments of Mumbai, Pune, as well as Nagpur. And our schools give lottery-based admissions to children from the lowest income communities at the age of 3, which is the junior kindergarten. And we support the children all the way up to grade 10 through our own staff members. And I would like to just quickly share about Akanksha's approach to parents as partners prior to the pandemic, during the pandemic, and what we believe is going to be vital as we look ahead. I think every single Akanksha school has 3 pillars of setting their goals, as well as what will constitute success for a school. And one of the key pillars is parents as partners. Therefore, even before the pandemic, every single school in the organization had its unique set of practices aligned to a common framework that really allowed the educators, which includes the principals as well as the teachers and the social workers and counselors, to really be in constant partnership with the parents. This included 3 forms. One is, of course, school management committees. The second is calling in the parents fairly regularly, which was once a week, especially for K-2 key stage, for parent classes, which allowed us to really, teach them very practical, tangible strategies that the parents could reinforce at home. And the third is the social-emotional development for the child, which required one-on-one parent-teacher counselor conferences as well, to really be able to reinforce some of the key messages on behavior shifts that were required. So it was a very holistic approach for engaging the parents. I think at the heart of this, and this is my appeal to all the educators as we think about coming out of the pandemic, that all the structured tech and structured teacher support programs can only work if there is a deep belief that parents are willing and are potentially capable of making a difference at home. And I think that trust should underpin all the other technical strategies and adaptive shifts that we want to be able to bring out. And I think that's where perhaps we've tasted, a significant degree of success during the pandemic, which allowed us to pivot many of our in-person practices in the K-2 key stage to online learning. Even before we partnered with Rocket Learning to bring in the low-tech WhatsApp-based engagement program, we were running parent partnership classes with a fair degree of success, with almost 70% of our parents coming in regularly for doubt solving, for accessing the YouTube video links that our teachers were creating and sending it to them. And I think what underpinned that fair degree of success, even before we brought in a low-tech engagement program, which took the engagement even higher, was the trust and the partnerships that we have, built over the years. So I think the fact that, we need to really now see parents as partners, a lot of this seems to be picking up, momentum during the pandemic because we had no other alternative. For this to sustain, I do think that before we talk about the strategies, the mindset of, embracing truly to see parents as partners is fairly crucial. And as we look ahead as a Akansha Foundation, I think our big lessons here have been that how can we tie in some of the core concepts that previously we believed had to be done in the classrooms. Can that now be done in partnership with the parents at home, especially once the schools reopen, where there is going to be so much pressure to bridge the most basics of gaps. So I think in partnership with Rocket Learning, as well as many other organizations, we are figuring out how do we blend in classroom learning as well as at home learning to fulfill the aims of the foundation literacy and numeracy mission. Siddhant, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Saurabh. Thanks, Nisha, for covering the report so well. I'm Siddhant. I'm one of the co-founders and part of the leadership team and Rocket Learning.
I can't hear it.
Yeah, Siddhant, we can't hear you.
Yeah, am I audible now? Yeah, sorry. So I was mentioning, as Saurabh was also saying, I think at Rocket Learning, we firmly believe that parents are a key part of providing early childhood education. I'm one of the co-founders and part of the leadership team in Rocket Learning. And Rocket Learning, at Rocket Learning, we want to provide early childhood education at appropriate level, high quality education at scale. We do that using a technology and community-based solution. We use a framework called AIM, where we try to provide something that we called awareness, information, and motivation to parents at their home in a way that they can participate in their child's education in a meaningful manner. A is more awareness and aspiration that they can actually be part and contribute to their child's education. I is information on what they can do as parents at a daily level, which translates to small bite-sized activities that they can do at their homes with household materials with their children during the day. And M is motivation, where once the behavior of the parents is building, we try to use technology to further that behavior and to motivate the parents positively. Examples that Nisha covered in the report, which is our weekly report cards or group compilation videos, are small features that we have built on top of simple technologies like WhatsApp to enable this. We currently work with around 300,000 parents. 20,000 of those parents are in Bombay, which is the program that the study covers. And we're very excited about partnering with Akansha schools and with the team to get this research off the ground. And of course, this research has shown that the technology-based solution is able to actually move the needle in terms of parent behaviors, in terms of parent mindsets. And as Saurabh also mentioned, this model will be very relevant in the future as schools reopen, because a blended learning model where the school systems, the teachers, and the parents are working together to give a better education to children will be the new norm and the new status quo, which will give better education to kids.
Thank you so much, Siddhant and Saurabh, for taking us through that. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Dhwani Mehta, who will be moderating the discussion. Dhwani, on to you.
Thanks very much, Nisha. Hi, everyone. I'm Dhwani Mehta. I'm one of the co-founders of the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. And welcome to this report launch and panel discussion on some of the challenges with delivering early childhood education during the pandemic. I'm very excited that we have a fantastic panel discussion today. And I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists. We have, and they're all online now. And we begin with, I'll begin by introducing Atishi, who who is a very well-known name to everyone in the education sector. As you know, Atishi is a serving MLA from Kalkaji constituency and a member of the Aam Aadmi Party, and has done lots of work on education in Delhi, fee hikes in schools, on the happiness curriculum, on school management committees. And we're really excited to hear her views on what some of the challenges with delivering ECE during the pandemic have been. We also have Rebecca Winthrop with us, who is a senior fellow and co-director of the Center of Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. She's written a lot on marginalized children and the challenges with delivering relevant quality education to them, and especially on how families and communities can be better engaged in providing ECE to children, so which is very, very relevant to our discussion here today. And so we're very excited to have you here, Rebecca. Welcome. And we also have Mr. Ashish Dhawan, who is a founder and chairman of the Central Square Foundation, as well as a founding member of Ashoka University. He's, again, someone who's very passionate about education and has worked a lot on pursuing evidence-driven and innovative, system-based reforms in school education. And most importantly, for the purposes of this discussion today, he's also the founding chair of Rocket Learning's board. So we're very excited to have you here, Mr. Dhawan. We've had the pleasure of working you in the past, and we're very glad you could make it to today's event as well. So thank you. In addition to the panelists, we're also going to have bites from parents themselves, as well as Balwadi teachers and teachers from Akanksha. So, the format of today's discussion is going to be that we will play some video bites from parents. I will call upon the two of the teachers to speak, and we'll get the panelists to respond to this, and then, have a discussion amongst themselves, and finally throw it open for questions from the audience if we have the time. So great. With that, I'm going to begin by calling upon Nisha, if we could have the video bite from the parents today.
Yes, I'll just share.
First segment. They're going to be talking about some of the experiences that they had during the pandemic.
Sorry, is that not audible?
No, it's not audible, Nisha. Yeah.
Just a second. Just gonna try again.
अगर क्लास मिस हो जाता है तो हम टीचर को कॉल कर लेते हैं, या फिर किसी पेरेंट से पूछ के जो कुछ होमवर्क है क्या है वो पूछ के। और गूगल क्लासरूम से तो बहुत ही अच्छा हो रहा है, मतलब उस पे जो होमवर्क आता है वो करके उसी पर ही भेजना पड़ता है। नहीं, व्हाट्सएप पे तो वैसे हो जाता है, हम अगर कुछ नहीं हो रहा है तो दीदी बोलती है कि नेट भेजा तो भी चलेगा, लेकिन भेजो। वो कभी कभी वीडियोस डाउनलोड नहीं होते हैं, फोटोज जाते नहीं है, नेटवर्क इशू रहता है तब। जैसे कि स्कूल में वो टीचर ऐसा कुछ हमें बताते नहीं कि जो बाहर से लाना पड़े, वो घर में जो अवेलेबल है उनसे ही हम करवाते हैं। जैसे कि अभी कोई ऑब्जेक्ट लगता है, अभी लेटर सीख रहे तो कोई ऑब्जेक्ट है, या शेप सीख रहे तो घर में मिल जाता है, शेप्स वगैरह, सर्कल हो, रेक्टेंगल, ट्रायंगल, घर में कुछ ना कुछ तो चीजें मिल ही जाती है, तो वो बाहर से लानी नहीं पड़ती है, कुछ एफर्ट नहीं करना पड़ता है।
और टेक्नोलॉजी के माध्यम से मेरा मानना है कि हम जब क्लास लेते हैं, जूम क्लास, तो उसका रिकॉर्ड रख के वो रिकॉर्ड भी भेज सकते हैं उनको, उनके लिए मैसेज कर सकते हैं। व्हाट्सएप पे हमें मैसेज वगैरह आते हैं, आज बच्चों से ये स्टडी करवा के लेना है। उनकी जो दीदी है वो हमें मैसेज करती है, आज बच्चों से ये स्टडी करवा के लेना है, उसे ये एक्टिविटी करनी है। फिर हम बाद में वो करके उनका वीडियो निकालते हैं। बच्चा जब करता है एक्टिविटी तो हम फिर से वापस से दीदी को भेजते हैं, तो वो चेक करती है, जिनका वीडियो आया अच्छा है उनको बोलते हैं वो अच्छा आया है, और जूम क्लास पे भी हम लेक्चर अटेंड करते हैं बच्चों का। हमें ये हेल्प मिलती है कि हाँ, हमें हमारे बच्चों को अभी क्या करना है, क्योंकि हमें भी इतना मालूम नहीं, हम टीचर नहीं है, लेकिन जो वो हमें गाइड करते हैं, हम उसको लेके अपने बच्चों के साथ एक्टिविटी वो सारी करते हैं। वो बच्चा हंसी हंसी खुशी खुशी से करता है, हाँ दीदी ने बोला है आप करोगे तो स्टार मिलेगा, आप करोगे, दीदी बोली मैं चॉकलेट दूंगी, फिर वो बच्चा खुशी खुशी से हर काम करता है। तो लॉकडाउन के जरिए भी हमारी बच्ची का कोई मतलब कोई पढ़ाई में कोई बाधा नहीं पड़ी, उसका कंटिन्यू क्लास और जो शिक्षा उसको मिलनी चाहिए अच्छे से, वो सब इसको मिल पा रही है।
ऑनलाइन तो वैसे अभी बहुत ही मुश्किल है, लेकिन अभी भी बच्चे नहीं बैठते हैं, उनको बैठाना पड़ता है जबरदस्ती। उनको जैसे कि वो अभी छोटे हैं, तो उनके तरह सोच के या फिर उनको जो अच्छा लगता है खेलने से, खेलते वक्त अभी वो खुद सीख लेते हैं तो वो बहुत अच्छा रहेगा। खेलते खेलते सीखते हैं। मतलब अभी वो पानी का वीडियो था, एक गिलास से दूसरे गिलास में डालने का, वो अभी पानी खाता, इसलिए वो पानी तो बच्चों को खेलना पसंद है, तो वो उसने बहुत अच्छे से किया। और गिरा हुआ पानी भी साफ करना था नैपकिन से, तो वो उसने बराबर से किया। वो उसको ज्यादा कुछ बोलना नहीं पड़ा या उससे करवाना नहीं पड़ा, वो उसने खुद से किया।
चैलेंजेस तो बहुत आए हैं। बच्चे मतलब जो स्कूल में जाके पढ़ाई होती है उतना घर पे नहीं हो रही है। मतलब वो खुद टीचर जैसे सिखाते हैं, टीचर के दीदी भैया के जैसे सुनते हैं, वो माँ के नहीं सुनते, मतलब फादर के नहीं सुनते हैं। भैया अब हर चीज तो पढ़ाई नहीं है, बच्चा अभी इतना छोटा है, वो ABCD 1 2 3 तो पढ़ेगा नहीं, उसको हर चीज खेल खेल में एक्टिविटी से ही हम सिखा पाएंगे।
Great. So I'll just summarize that quickly for those of you who might not be comfortable in Hindi, but it seemed like it was a positive experience that parents had with using online tools like Google Classroom and WhatsApp, as well as the support and guidance they received from their teachers. But I mean, I think as is common even with the adults who've been using Zoom, they obviously you struggle to make children stay online. And engage them with the activities that teachers send them, and that online mediums of instruction at the end of the day can't replace physical interaction. So I mean that's a very brief summary, and as you can see, the chat also has the video transcript. So if anyone's interested in reading that, they can do that in more detail. Jumping off from that, we evidently saw parents who were very comfortable using technology, and especially WhatsApp and their phones. And as our study shows, this is because the households we studied have a relatively high level of internet literacy and smartphone penetration. So I'm going to, if I could ask Atishi, I mean, this is obviously a positive outcome, but what do we do in instances where we don't have this kind of context? How do we ensure that for households that are not literate in the same way or don't have access to devices, how do we ensure that we address this kind of technological inequality and reach the last child, so to speak?
So first of all, I must thank you to Vidhi for organizing this program. And I think that these are definitely very important questions that we all need to discuss. And sometimes in the past, because in the course of the last year, the pandemic has affected education. There have been many discussions around online education. And I sometimes find myself far more pessimistic than a lot of other people who are speaking on this issue. Because the reality that we have seen in the last 1.5, now running into 2 years, is that it is a deeply, deeply unequal society we live in as far as online access is concerned. And if you were to look at education as a whole, not just early childhood education, but across different age groups, we have seen that the last 20, 30 years had really begun to bridge at least the access divide. A quality divide still existed in schools. Some schools had far better quality of education than others, but every child had access to early childhood education, to primary, to secondary education. Now, what the pandemic has done has really taken us back to the early 90s, where at that point of time, only 60% children used to go to school. And that is really 60, and it's interesting because today in Delhi also, when we did a survey, we found that only 60% children have device and internet access. And this is Delhi. This is not any other part of the country. So I think this is, in terms of children actually having access, we have actually gone back a long way. Now, yes, I think that we have used many tools, even in Delhi for younger kids especially. We have used other tools like IVR calls, by sending messages, by sending stories, voice activities, etc. to parents, by sending SMSs, which have some text and some activity that the parent can do, parents can do. WhatsApp has been another medium. But I think this falls substantially short of where we need to go. And this deeply divided society that we live in, I think has been brought out very intensely during the pandemic. Because on one hand, you see the fact that there are certain children who study in high-end private schools, who come from more middle class, upper class backgrounds, whose education has virtually been undisrupted, because every child in the household has a separate device, has an internet connection, and third thing that I've discovered most importantly, has a separate room in which they can continue their education. And whereas for low-income communities, I think the story is very, very different. And I think that this is definitely something that, I mean, I don't think that there is an easy answer for this question, because states and governments are also not in a position to provide devices to everyone.
That's right.
And because of the kind of cost involved, I don't think realistically that any government would be able to provide a device to every child. And in the absence of a device for every child, and the absence of a high quality data connection, because we also know when all of us are talking on mobile phones, how often clients get disconnected. And you have 80% children who are doing their online education on data connections rather than broadband connections. So I think it's I think the honest answer that I have, Dhwani, is that we do not have very easy solutions to these problems. Yes, a lot of creative solutions have emerged, but I am yet to see solutions that are scalable for a context like India.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Atishi. And, you know, speaking of this kind of inequality, I can see that right here in my own house. I have my mother-in-law in the next room who's, you know, an educator of 30 years experience, who's designing a curriculum for an international school that involves capoeira. And outside me at the construction site, there are children working, and children who are, playing with concrete and gravel for the most part, really. So there's all kinds of inequality, but, you know, I guess, you know, ECE, I mean, COVID and then the delivery of ECE has really shown up what some of this tech-based inequality might be. So maybe if I could move to someone who might be a tech optimist, you know, rather than, and have a slightly less pessimistic outlook on how, and maybe ideas on how to scale. So Mr. Dhawan, if I could ask you what you think is, you know, the potential that technology has to scale, you know, in a way that bridges some of this inequality, and what you see the role of technology playing going forward.
No, thanks, Tony. And firstly, I want to congratulate you for the report and for hosting this. Yeah, I'm more of an optimist than Atishi, whilst recognizing everything she has said. I mean, the reality is that smartphone penetration in India is at, you know, 60%, and in larger cities, it's closer to 80+%. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the child will have access to the device just because there's device penetration in the household. Having said that, I think that, you know, what Rocket Learn has shown, and some others as well, is that these are proof points that, you know, some low-tech interventions that are anchored through teachers and parent peer groups can really increase parental and student engagement. I'm not saying it's going to work for all parents because there is an access issue, but at this point, I don't think we're ready for prime time as yet. I think that time may be 3 to 5 years down the road as devices will become more ubiquitous. You know, we've got this new geophone coming out, device prices only go down, bandwidth prices only go down. And if you look at other comparable countries, with GDP per capita similar to India's, actually penetration's even higher. So we're going to get there, right? And so we have to build for the future as opposed to, and test things out, because it's not clear, it's not obvious that solutions are going to work. And a lot of solutions, I think, are not designed for this low-tech environment, and neither are designed keeping in mind the fact that, we need the teacher to be involved or parent peer groups to be involved. I see with a lot of tech products, one is they have a hard time getting adoption, but engagement is really, really difficult. I mean, if you look at the funnel, there's drop-off at very, very, very sharp drop-off. Often a parent will download an app and within 2 months, they've deleted the app, So they don't see the use case. But I think in this case, we're seeing something different. I think your study has shown there's a substantial difference between the treatment and control, despite a natural response bias. And at least we're seeing much greater engagement. The parents who have access to this device are seeing value. And look, during COVID, it was one of the few ways. I mean, you could use broadcast TV, which has a higher penetration, but it's a one-way medium. It's a very passive medium. You could do some other things, like Atishi was saying, which one must, using IVRS, recognizing the fact that people have feature phones. But I think one should, at the same time, do a lot of experimentation with smartphones, because that's the future. I do think that the COVID moment has made it clear to parents that the phone can be used for learning for their children. And I think it's here to stay post-COVID. We're seeing that a lot of government systems are responding by, with more sort of structured home learning along with school. And I fundamentally believe that EdTech will be additive to the physical. And so in that sense, I see this as a very sort of promising move. It's showing positive signs. Obviously, more evidence needs to be built before we're ready for prime time. And by the time we're ready for prime time, I think device penetration will be there, and we'll have fewer access issues than we're faced with today, which Atishi clearly spelled out.
Absolutely. And I agree. I mean, this is going to be, a work in progress, and it'll have to be supported by, we'll have to have blended modes of delivering this kind of education. We need, as our study shows, continued engagement from teachers and perhaps and support from the state as well. Maybe not, as Atishi said, in necessarily providing every child with an internet device, but in thinking through what some of the support could be that teachers could provide to parents and children in helping them engage better with these kinds of tech interventions. But if I could ask, so we've sort of spoken about general access issues here so far, but there's also a specific kind of inequality that sometimes comes into play with tech interventions like this, especially for children with disabilities who tend to get left behind in programs like this. So if I could ask Rebecca, how do we address this kind of inequality, and how do we design interventions and policies that are geared to ensuring that these that this kind of delivery of education is accessed by the most vulnerable and marginalized groups as well?
Thank you, Devani. It's great to be here. Before I sort of dive in, I did want to say congratulations on the report. I think it's always good to evaluate. Obviously, as a researcher, I would say that it's useful insights. I have to say I wasn't surprised by any of the findings in the report, mainly because they align with the existing literature. We know parents are desperate to help their kids in any way they can. They often don't know how. And there's been other studies showing that tech in sort of nudging and helping give tips to parents of very young kids can help them sort of pivot their behaviors and really support ECE. We also know, and I think this is really important, and it goes back to Siddhant and Sarub's comment, and also what Ashish just said, that the best way to get effective sort of family-school collaboration is to have a trusting relationship. And teachers are the mediator of that relationship because they're on the front lines with the parents. So it doesn't surprise me whatsoever that the best results are in the Akanksha schools that have for many years, invested heavily in many strategies, as you heard before, on really developing that relational trust. There was a really interesting study in the World Bank that looked at cost effectiveness of improving foundational literacy. And they looked at a bunch of different interventions, and their number one best cost effective intervention was using technology to communicate sort of very context specific information to marginalized parents and communities. But it was only successful in places where that message came from a trusted source. So I just want to underline that people power piece is going to be crucial to any success of any tech we use in this space. In terms of your question about what we can do to make sure that the most marginalized are included, I thought Atashi raised a really good point. And I do agree with Ashish that sort of we do need to horizon scan and look forward, and smartphones probably are the future. So I would suggest build for the future, but hustle for the present. And when I say hustle for the present, that is find any possible strategy you could possibly use right now to reach those kids, because the less time they are reached, the more likely they will never be plugged back in. And I would encourage everybody on this call to think about your low-tech options. I mean, when we did our research, we just launched yesterday this big playbook on family school collaboration, 3-year project, started before COVID, continued amid COVID. And we quickly moved from looking at, evidence-based proven RCT practices to those plus promising practices that align with the evidence we know. And some of the best really promising strategies that have come out of COVID are low tech. They are calling parents. They use people power. They use tech, but they use people power. They call parents, SMS them, dummy phones, put on speaker, come bring the kid to the phone, have a chat. Does the kid understand it? If not, send another question, try again. If yes, send a harder question. It's like a low tech adapted learning strategy. And we actually saw in Botswana which was mid RCT, on that approach, that actually helped. Actually, kids learned. They did well. So, and I know that Pratham and I know Akanksha also has pivoted to low tech. So, I just would encourage everyone to not forget about that option as we are testing and refining sort of the more high tech options. And one thing that we certainly know from scaling effective solutions around anything with technology really is that you've got to use the technology that's in a community. Thinking that you're going to go out and supply it as part of the solution is very precarious and difficult. So I would say, what is the tech in the community? Design your intervention for that, because that tech in the community, they have maintenance programs, they have places to buy, etc. So those would be my 2 cents.
So thanks.
I'd like to add something funny.
Yeah, please.
I think that, often what a lot of our discussion about education around COVID times is focused a lot on technology, which is obvious because I think that you cannot have face-to-face education. But when we are looking at going forward, because we don't even know what the future holds, that we don't know what things are going to happen. I think that another equally important thing, which comes out even in the experiences that have been shared, which I feel deserves far more attention, is the role of parents and the community. I think that often a lot of our spotlight is on technology and technological solutions. But I think that far more attention needs to be paid to the parents, to the community, their engagement, and how we can develop champions within the community and spaces within the community where the educational engagement can continue to happen. And it need not happen in the same way as it happens in the classroom. We can think of different kinds of activities. We can think of different kinds of learning modules. I remember that in some communities that Pratham was working, they had actually got wall painting done of the Asar tool. And I think that is another direction that requires a lot of thought, then how is it that we are going to create these champions within the community? That one thing that COVID has shown us is that we cannot rely entirely on school as a medium for education of children. And so how do you build the power of that community? And one intervention that we are starting now, and maybe in within the next year or so, we would be able to see some results of that, is this activity of what we are calling creating school mitras along with SMC members in every community, right, whom we are looking to create as community champions who will reach out to parents, engage with them, make sure that parents are engaged in their children's education, maybe conduct small reading melas in the community, conduct activities for children of different age groups. So creating these structures, I feel, so I just want to put that out there, that when we are looking at education, which may not be fully reliant on schools as the medium of learning, yes, tech has to be looked at, but so do making learning communities needs to be an important area of thought and focus.
I'm very glad you brought that up, Atishi, because that ties in very nicely with the next speaker who I'm going to call upon, who is a Balwadi teacher, Ms. Kalpana Palan. Hello, Ms. Kalpana. Welcome to the event. And I'm going to ask you about some of the experiences and challenges that you faced both during and before and during COVID. So, आपका क्या अनुभव रहा बच्चों को पढ़ाना? सॉरी, एक मिनट कल्पना जी, आप जरा म्यूट पे है, आप जरा अनम्यूट करेंगे? कल्पना जी, आप जरा अनम्यूट कीजिए अपने आप को। हाँ, हेलो, मैं सिर्फ पूछना चाहती थी कि आपका अनुभव क्या रहा कोविड के पहले और दौरान भी, और आपको क्या कठिनाइयां महसूस हुई, और आप पालकों को एजुकेशन के अलावा कौन कौन से आप कैसे उनकी सहायता कर रहे थे, उनके स्वास्थ्य या राशन के साथ, या उनकी फाइनेंशियल मुसीबतों के साथ आपका क्या अनुभव रहा, और आपने कौन कौन सी तरकीब अपनाई पालकों को सहायता देने के लिए इस समय में? तो जरा आपसे सुनना चाहते हैं।
यस, हेलो मैम। हम स्टार्टिंग में तो बहुत ही अनुभव बुरा था कि हम वहां तक पहुंच नहीं पा रहे थे, बच्चों तक पहुंच नहीं पा रहे थे, लेकिन उसके बाद धीरे धीरे सब समझ में आया कि अब ये चलने ही वाला है, तो हमें पेरेंट्स तक पहुंचना है, उनकी मदद करनी है। तो बच्चों तक पहुंचने के लिए पहले तो बहुत सारे व्हाट्सएप पे ये किया, ऐप से पढ़ाना शुरू किया, पर हम पहुंच नहीं पा रहे थे। फिर धीरे धीरे ये रॉकेट लर्निंग टीम हमारे साथ जुड़ गई और हमें उनकी बहुत ही अच्छी सहायता मिली पेरेंट्स तक पहुंचने के लिए। डेली की वीडियोस वो भेजते हैं जो बहुत ही इजी है। बहुत से पेरेंट्स हैं जो काम पे जाते हैं, डेली बच्चों को नहीं पढ़ा पाते, तो ये वीडियो के थ्रू हमें बहुत ही आसानी हुआ कि बच्चों को जब टाइम मिले, पेरेंट्स को जब टाइम मिले, तो वो इजीली वो वीडियो उन्हें दिखा के कभी भी पढ़ा सके। थोड़ा अनुभव तो बहुत बुरा था, पर हाँ ये है कि हम शिक्षक में से एक एजुकेटर बने कि हमें पहले सीखना पड़ा और फिर बच्चों को सिखाना पड़ा, कि सीखते सीखते हम भी सीख गए। और सच में तो ये रॉकेट लर्निंग टीम से हमें बहुत ज्यादा सहायता मिली कि उनके वीडियोस इतने अच्छे हैं कि हमें डेली बच्चों को पढ़ाने के लिए वो वीडियोस भेजते हैं, उनकी स्टोरी के वीडियो, उनके पोएम्स के वीडियो, और ऐसे ये स्माइली रिपोर्ट कार्ड्स वगैरह बहुत ही हमें अच्छा, उनसे बहुत ही अच्छी सहायता मिली बच्चों को पढ़ाने के लिए। हाँ, फिर भी अगर कोई पेरेंट्स है जिसके पास व्हाट्सएप नहीं है, स्मार्टफोन्स नहीं है, तो बेटर हम उनके घर जाके पढ़ाते हैं, या हमारी एक हेल्पर है हमारे साथ, उनके थ्रू हम बच्चों को पढ़ाते हैं, या फिर हमने स्कूल में ही पेरेंट्स को बुला लिया था बुक्स लेके, या हम जो पेरेंट्स बुक्स नहीं ले पाते, कुछ नई चीजें ले पाते हैं, तो हम उन्हें 1 मंथ का होमवर्क वो बुक्स में लिख के उन्हें दे देते हैं ताकि उन्हें आसानी हो जाए बच्चों को पढ़ाने के लिए। ये सब हमने किया बच्चों को सिखाने के लिए। राशन तो हाँ जरूर दिया, किसी जो कुछ नहीं ले पाते हैं उनकी सहायता की, उनके घर जाके भी सहायता की।
Thank you, Kalpana ji. So just, again, just to summarize, obviously Ms. Kalpana ji has had a very positive experience with the Rocket Learning videos and found them to be really helpful in.
Thanks to Rocket Learning team के जिन्होंने इतने अच्छे और इतने इजी वीडियोस हैं कि बच्चों को भी मजा आ रहा है और पेरेंट्स को तो बहुत ही अच्छा लग रहा है। सच में हम एक घर बच्चों को शिक्षा दे पाए तो ये रॉकेट लर्निंग टीम के थ्रू, नहीं तो हम तो पूरे ब्लैंक हो चुके थे कि कैसे उन तक पहुंचे, क्योंकि बहुत सारे एप्स जो हम नहीं कर पा रहे थे, तो इनके डेली वीडियोस और ये एक्टिविटीज हमें, और बच्चे वेट करते हैं अभी तो कि वीडियो आए हम वो करें और उन्हें अच्छा लग रहा है। मेन तो ये है कि हर घर में स्मार्टफोन नहीं है, बच्चे पेरेंट्स स्लम एरिया से है तो जॉब पे जाते हैं, तो ये वीडियोस तो हमें इतना इजी हुआ कि वो कभी भी उन्हें करवा सकते हैं, वो एक्टिविटीज इजीली करवा सकते हैं, तो वो इतना इजी हो गया हमारे लिए। बच्चे वेट करते हैं, वीकेंड पे स्माइलीज आती है, ऐसे नहीं है कि ओनली पढ़ाने का वीडियो है उनका, स्टोरी का वीडियो भी और एकदम शॉर्ट स्टोरी इजीली, सो बहुत अच्छा है। तो मुझे सच में ही थैंक्स बोलना है कि उनके थ्रू हम बच्चे तक पहुंच पाए, उन्हें अच्छे से शिक्षा दे पाए और हम खुद भी सीख पाए उनके थ्रू कि कैसे करना है और क्या कैसे करना है।
Thank you. Yeah, so I think they've had a very positive experience with, just they were very grateful to be able to reach children using, through Rocket Learning in this instance, and to be able to engage parents better. And so, obviously, it seems as if these kinds of teaching and learning materials have played an important role in increasing parental engagement, and perhaps even more than it might have been before the pandemic. So maybe if I could ask Rebecca whether there is what should we be thinking about in terms of encouraging this kind of parental engagement going beyond COVID and school closures. What are some of the systemic changes we should be thinking about in terms of ensuring that we have the same kind of level of engagement that we seem to have seen during the pandemic using these kinds of tech interventions?
Yes, it's a good question. And I have to say, I do think that we collectively as a global community, because almost every country went through this together at the same time, have a moment to pivot actually how education systems think about communities. And it's really along of the lines of what Atashi said, and frankly, along the lines of what Akanksha has been doing for many, many years. Because schools in most places of the world, I would say, let me rephrase that, school systems in most places of the world have an inward orientation. They are looking inward, they're looking at teachers and training and delivery, and frankly, logistics. I mean, the logistics of running a school system at large scale is amazing that it happens, that we pull it off every day. The entire, big chunk of the country's kids go to school at the same time, more or less. And I think the biggest thing that would help is a couple of things, but first and foremost, I think it's this mindset shift. And it's really what Sarah was talking about before, that schools are partners and there is a continuum. And we, even when we were doing this research for this playbook on family school collaboration, so many parent organizations that we worked with and are part of our family engagement network said, please don't use the term educators to mean teachers, because we are educators. We are educators first. And frankly, we are educators all the way through on many different types of competencies. Academic being really important, but the role of the school. But we have, we want good kids. We want well-rounded kids who, yes, have good, strong academic competence, but who know who they are and have a good set of values and can make their way in the world. And so I actually think that was an interesting learning from me. And it is a mindset shift to say, parents are co-educators, teachers are professionals, they are trained, they do need respect and support, but anything we can do to shift that mindset for partnership, I think is crucial. And that includes sort of eliminating from our vocabulary which I hear all the time, and frankly, I used to use it, hard to reach families.
Right.
We have seen from COVID, and one of our partners in this Family Engagement and Education Network, which is a global network across 12 countries, and also includes Learning for Equity in Maharashtra and Himachal Pradesh state and various others working with them, is that in Himachal Pradesh, there was lots of hard to reach parents. When you asked parents to come to the school, they pivoted, they hustled in terms of their communication approaches. They used every possible means, Facebook, WhatsApp, calling, and all of a sudden, a few short time, they got 80% engagement of parents. So it really is that we should start talking about how, what's our, hard to reach schools? What can we do differently? So frankly, I know that doesn't sound super concrete, but what we've seen is that mindset shift is the very first thing that needs to happen. And the minute you have that mindset shift, all of a sudden the school, the education personnel, the jurisdiction can start seeing all the different things that communities can do and complement and partner on.
Absolutely. And, speaking about this kind of mindset shift, maybe if I could ask Ashish, is, how do you see this mindset shifting as far as, the adoption of tech interventions goes, whether it's amongst schools and teachers or, even at a policy level amongst, governments and education, educationists. Do you see this mindset shifting at all?
Yeah, I think my own sense is that, look, at the central government level, we have this ICT at schools. It doesn't work. I'm not sure if it will in the future. And to be honest, I think right now we're talking about home learning, where really the device cost is borne by the parent. The device is in the home. So the costs are marginal at best. And for a system to absorb even what Rocket Learn does over time, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny cost. So I think we need to keep that in mind. So I think from a government standpoint right now, I think the goal is to work with them to pilot solution, because eventually it's through the government system that you can scale them. And even though I think the challenge for government is because access is not universal, I think politically it's a challenge sometimes to roll these things out. And so I think doing it in pilot mode is probably the right approach, for the moment. I do think that, as I mentioned low tech earlier and others too, and we do need to recognize that we design things keeping in mind the context, keeping in mind, what works for parents. And I think the first thing, and of course, the fact that, look, in India, you've got patchy data, you have low memory space on the phone, you have many other competing demands. The phone is not always available in the child's hand. You got to keep all of that in mind. But where I disagree with Atishi is, by all means, we must have the person in the community. And it should have happened earlier. COVID's a wake-up call that we need to engage parents and communities in a more serious way. Maybe we need a physical space as well. I think what solutions like this, which meet users where they are, WhatsApp in particular, which is fairly ubiquitous now among smartphone users. The sharing is asynchronous. It's short form content, which is what people are used to right now. You have all these motivations through social incentives, and you can experiment with a lot of nudges as you pilot right now. I think it really reduces the burden in terms of tech adoption. Normally, tech adoption in a system is very, very difficult. I think this low-tech solution that meets parents where they are, that recognizes the reality of how people engage with this medium, and yet is very engaging, to be honest. And it's quite standardized in terms of what I'm sure I can measure. The offline world will be good in the community, but I can tell you that I'm not confident that we'll be able to do this at scale. Maybe Delhi can, but if you go to Uttar Pradesh, can you do this at scale with any degree of fidelity where anything meaningful is going to happen in those community centers? I think the human being in that community can play a role in terms of mobilizing parents, keeping them engaged, following up with them. But I think you can complement that with a tech solution, a low-tech solution in the future. My sense is that's the solution that will eventually emerge, 4 or 5 years down the road. And so I think it's very important as I said earlier, that we do these experiments now and do them in the real world context, despite the constraints.
Right. No, absolutely. And speaking about keeping, being mindful of the context and the role of community engagement and involvement. I mean, it was also clear from what Ms. Kalpana said that the teachers played, perhaps had a disproportionate burden during this time to help families, not just educationally, but in other ways as well. So, what are some of the ways in which, and maybe I could ask this to Atishi, that the state can think about, ensuring that this kind of support doesn't come just from the individual initiative of teachers, but that there is, institutional support from the state and from the schooling system as well. So, how do we think about these kinds of issues?
Absolutely. I'd just like to respond to one thing that Ashish was saying. I think that I think tech and community-oriented solutions are not either or. I think they both have to complement each other. Yeah. It is, I think that it is very clear that neither one of those two on their own would be able to provide the entirety of the solution we need. And I think that, as we said, that COVID has made us look outside of the school for the first time. And I completely agree with Rebecca when she says that schools are very inward looking institutions. And it seems to sort of end at the boundary of the school walls, that that is where responsibility seems to end. And I think COVID has to be given credit for, like, the situation has to be given credit for the fact that the school and the entire education system was made to step out of the school boundaries. And in fact, even now as schools are reopening, I find that a lot of teachers are now having to go into the community to find the students and get them back into schools. And I think that this, I personally think, is a very important thing per se, that this collaboration of the school and the parents, of the school and the community, is something that is essential for children's education. And I think in the public school system becomes all the more important, because in the public school system, parents have not really been looked upon as partners. They have been looked, in fact, in Delhi 6 years ago, when we started parent-teacher meetings in our schools, parents were not even allowed to enter the school premises. Like, you would have a security guard standing at the gate and saying, "Ki ji, aap andar nahi ja sakte hain." And so I think from that point of view, this pandemic situation has made the school step out into the community. And now I think that between school, the community and the parents and technology is where we really need to look for answers and solutions. And I think that development of interesting content is also extremely important. And this applies, I believe, not just to the entire public education system, but this applies equally to the entire education system, even children going into elite schools. I was just with a friend's son who was just explaining to me how he has spent most of the last 1.5 years with his video switched off in the classes that he attends of an extremely expensive and high-end private school. And he was just explaining to me, he's in grade 5 or 6, he was explaining to me how going back to school would be difficult, because in the classroom, the teacher can actually see you and see what you're up to. And so I think that the fact of the matter is that while he may have had access to continued education, I think that engagement of how do teachers, educators, parents actually have engaging content so that children, even via technology, low tech, high tech, whatever the nature of the technology can be, actually are constantly engaging. And I think that it's actually, if you think about it, it's the same challenge as there is in the classroom, that it's not just enough to have the curriculum that you're going to teach. Your pedagogy needs to be one that keeps the child engaged. And I think that is really something that we need to experiment on, even for the technology-based solutions that we have. And as I said, I think strongly go hand in hand, keeping in mind that the community and the parents have to play an important role, even when we are out of COVID times. And how is it that we can, our entire system that we are trying, testing, redesigning, keeps parents as a very important stakeholder in that. In fact, I would even go as far as saying that, right now we think a lot about teacher training. I mean, I think we almost need to think about, without the term sounding horrible, is parent training. Like actually having workshops for parents, keeping them engaged constantly in terms of what is going to be their role, what are the activities that they can do, and constantly guiding them in that process. I think that also now education systems as a whole need to start thinking about.
No, absolutely. And maybe, before I come to a teacher, Jasmine Sheikh, who can tell us a little bit about what her experience was during the pandemic and what she sees as the role of tech in the future. I'm also aware that, Rebecca has to leave a little early. So if I could just get her to follow up on what Atishi just said, on how do we think about parent training, as Atishi put it, and what are some of the systemic things that we can do to help that along?
Yeah, I mean, I'm drawing on, we just finished this 3-year project looking at what does effective family school collaboration look like and what are all the different ways. And so I put a link in the chat, but there is a lot of groups out there who are doing exactly, Atishi, what you just said. There's parent universities, there's entire family learning networks, there's whole national governments who have a family learning national strategy, which is literally about how do we support families, not to take the place of the teacher, but to, within their own parameters, and what does she says, meeting people where they're at, within their own parameters of their lives, their busy jobs, how many kids they have, putting food on the table, negotiating things. What is it they can do to support their kids? We surveyed 25,000 parents across 10 countries, and we did tons of focus groups. We surveyed 6,000 teachers, and I will tell you that every single parent wants to help their kid in their kids' learning. So it is not a lack of motivation. What it is a lack of trying to figure out creative strategies to help do that. And there's some wonderful examples of schools serving dual purposes. So it's less make a community center, send kids there. Schools, what is the one government institution that's in every community? A school. Schools are the hub, or should be the hub, of children's learning and development, and be a hub for family support. So there's great examples of schools playing dual roles, where families come in the evenings, and it depends on family schedules. You have to be really flexible. So you have to talk to the families and see what works for them. That's the trust piece. And they get their own literacy training. They get work support. Sometimes they're employed by the schools. And then in that process, they also add on, so they're there, they're motivated, they're helping their own lives, which helps serve the kids better. And in that process, they're being given tips and information about their kids and what's happening at the school and what you can do to support. And there's lots of small things that parents can do to support that doesn't mean they have to quit their jobs. They can ask them questions, and they can show, like, we know that one of the most important things is for parents to show an interest in what the kids are learning and to ask them questions about it and to have a dialogue and a discussion. We know from a lot of research that when there's that sort of super strong, as I said before, trusting relationship, there's really strong evidence from the US that schools that do have this trusting relationship, where parents see schools as hubs where they can go and get support and ask questions about many different things, including their kids, they're 10 times more effective at helping marginalized kids stay in school and really achieve academically. So there's a whole variety of solutions. And it really is up to a community to get creative. You can look at our playbook, and we have a map. We have a landscape strategy map where you can see all the different levers, from one-way communication sharing to material support to co-designing to, parent universities would fit, or parent learning networks would fit in that one of those buckets, but really, take that as a jumping off point.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. It would be really interesting to see what combination of strategies we can use to increase this kind of engagement in various Indian contexts. And therefore, so I'm going to jump to Jasmine Sheikh, who's a teacher at one of the Akanksha schools, to ask her about what she sees as the role of technology beyond COVID? And how would you like to see technology continuing to play a role in teaching and learning for early childhood education, both for parents as well as for teachers? So Jasmine, if we could hear quickly from you.
Yes, good evening, and thank you so much. I congratulate all of you to for conducting this panel, and it's a very important discussion we are having right now. As a teacher, I feel technology is gonna be a part of the students' learning. If you ask a 4 or 5 year old child that when he comes back from the school, what did you learn in the school, and he might end up saying nothing. We did nothing in the school. This was the answer they used to give. But now, because of technology, the classrooms are inside the houses. Parents are able to see what is happening inside the classroom, what the teachers are teaching, what are the teaching methodologies, how a teacher, which topic right now is currently going in the class. So technology will definitely play an important role through WhatsApps. As Ashish said, low tech is really important so that we cater to all the students and we reach maximum students. Also technology brings flexibility. If a child could not understand a particular topic, he can go back and see a particular video 10 times, 20 times, as much as he wants until he understands, right? You cannot ask, I mean, if a teacher keeps on repeating same thing, the quality will suffer. But the content, a resource is there, they can use the technology, go back and check and revisit the topics again. So technology will help there. We are looking at continuing the WhatsApp groups that we created in Akanksha, where we engaged parents and students together, because these WhatsApp groups, you can use them even if the school reopens, which will definitely reopen. So we will use these WhatsApp groups or video resources as pre-works. We can send homeworks through these groups, and parents will be engaged and also aware that what is happening in the classroom. So technology will definitely play an integral part. Having said that, I feel technology should be used mindfully so that these children are very young. Early childhood education, if you see the age group ranges from 3 to 6, 7 maximum. So if we need to educate our parents to use the technology mindfully, so that the learning is enhanced and they are not distracted by the technology, is my take on the technology. Yeah, thank you so much.
Very much, Jasmine. And maybe I'll have two final follow-up questions for Ashish and Atishi, before they have to leave. So maybe for Ashish, do you see now technology sort of, how long do you think it's going to play a supplementary role in the delivery of, early childhood education? And are we going to see, given the kind of enthusiasm with which at least this sample seems to have adopted some of these tech-based interventions, do we see this now as being one of the primary modes of delivery of ECE?
I think, look, it's technology still additive, I believe. The human being is at the center. The teacher plays a very important role. The parent plays an extremely important role. Technology in this low-tech way, I think can really, historically, we haven't found a way to engage parents. I think the nice thing with the Rocket Learn model is the way there's a systematized way to engage parents, where it's coming through the teacher, in these WhatsApp groups. And we've seen that the response rates can be quite high. I know in other models, we funded another organization called Sarthi, which has put community workers to go and visit homes, and alongside that done, WhatsApp. And the response rates can be even higher, but of course the cost is higher. So I agree with Atishi that community plus tech probably works best. The real question is, how do you mobilize the community? Is it sustainable to have someone do this on an ongoing basis without pay? Or will it require some kind of social worker who gets modest pay to play this role? Or will we make it so habit forming at some point, because it's viewed as an extension of school, because it's coming from the teacher. You know, that you spend a few hours in school and then, you know, there's 20 minutes of watch a video, reinforce learning, you know, take a quiz, you know, do those kinds of things. It's fun as well. I mean, there's not, you know, sometimes you can't do these fun things in the classroom because you don't have the technology to do it. I mean, if you've played a quiz on Kahoot, it's a lot of fun. I actually enjoy doing with my kids, with my son who's in school. And it gamifies learning in such a way that you can't do in the classroom. So I think that it's additive. It can help reinforce learning. It can, if we're smart, you can even have over time, a learning pathway that's more customized. It can make the job of the teacher easier because you can, you know, you have digitized responses to questions and you can understand much faster where learning is breaking down. So but having said that, we're still in the very, very early days of this. And so I think it behooves upon us to really do the kind of experimentation that Rocket Learn is doing. I think it's a very smart team. I've seen them really iterate and learn a lot. Long ways to go in terms of getting the conversion rates to where they are or the engagement to where it is, but it's improving on a month by month basis. And so we need to actually see many more experiments like this. And we need state governments to actually engage, find ways to partner with such organizations and test sites, maybe not at scale, you know, at this point in time. And I think for the future, you know, maybe we need to think, I mean, what's the role of the state in home learning? Is it just to say, we've got a home learning program and brand it as a home learning program, create awareness amongst parents so that parents take it more seriously, and then you couple that with some phone calls through dedicated call center, IVRS, you know, other means, and the state pays for that kind of stuff. I think over time, you know, a smart state may find a way, of course, when technology is more ubiquitous, to have a much more structured home learning program. And if you do that, my own sense is adoption and engagement rates will be much higher, and particularly if it's connected with schools and with other peer parents.
Absolutely. And maybe I'll just take the question that you raised in that statement to Atishi to conclude the panel discussion, which is, yes, what really is, what should we see as the role of the state in this kind of home-based learning? And maybe, you know, do we see any changes in, should we be rethinking any bits about, you know, of our national education policy in terms of both ECE or maybe the role of tech after, you know, having seen what COVID has taught us? Yeah, so, you know, is there any updating that might be required?
No, I think there's no doubt about the fact that the state has to play an important role. And I think state has to play an important role for the purpose of equity, because the fact of the matter is that there is, in government schools, more than 50% of the children who are coming in are first generation learners. So if we have to have any form of home learning that has to happen, the state definitely has to play a role, even in terms of, even if the family is providing technology, there has to be some curation of the content that has to exist. Providing the content, providing any support material that has to come. And I think it is the school and the state schools that have played the role in creating the step by which children who come from families where their parents are not educated are able to access education because of the material and the academic support that are provided by schools. And I think that applies equally to whether that learning is happening within the boundaries of the school or happening in the homes. And I think that really the learning for us that we all as governments need to take away, and schools as a whole need to take away, is that education has to happen outside the four boundaries of the school. To be fair, education has always happened outside the four boundaries of the school. But it is an illusion that a lot of education happens in schools outside the classroom, and a lot of education happens outside the four boundaries of the school. We are probably aware of that. from our own experiences growing up, from seeing children around us. But that is something we have never accounted for in policy. And I think if nothing else, for the first time, COVID has really pushed us into that direction to think about how learning is and needs to happen outside of schools.
Thanks very much, Atishi. And I think that's a great note to end today's session. I'm aware that you have been sending in audience questions, but I think we've been, the panelists have already responded to some of them, as has my colleague Nisha. So please do feel free to write write to Vidhi at vclp@vidhilegalpolicy.in if you do have any more questions. But I'd like to end here by thanking all our panelists, as well as the teachers, parents, and Akanksha and Rocket Learning, who made this study and partnership possible. It was a really enriching discussion. There's a lot to think about in terms of how we take tech-based solutions forward, and how we think more sustainably about both the role of technology as well as parental engagement during early childhood education. And we'd love to have your ideas on what are some of the issues we could be researching on or studying in more detail, or any other ideas that you might have as well. We are very happy to hear about them. So thanks very much. We'll make this recording available online later. And we hope to have you participate in more events like this. So good evening, everyone. Thanks once again, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.